"You're sleeping with your best friend's mother?" My mom screamed at me the moment I walked into the house. "This is not what it looks like. I'm not just hooking up with her, Mom. I'm in love with her," I said in a calm voice. The cat was already out of the bag. What use would it be to try to seal the bag now? So I told her the truth. "And what do you know about love? You're 16, Xavier, and she's 40. She crossed her arms and said all of this angrily. "But I do love her, Mom, and she loves me too," I said. "Yeah, hell she does. She doesn't love you, she's using you." The anger in her voice was so strong that it was starting to scare me, but I kept standing my ground and told her that if she does anything, I would leave the house. She started laughing in anger, which was even scarier. Then suddenly she stopped and said, "You think after pulling that stunt, you have the luxury to threaten me like that? You don't get to leave the house by yourself, Xavier. I'm kicking you out." After saying that, she stormed upstairs, while I stood there frozen, unable to believe my ears. I went to my room and started packing my stuff with the speed of a sloth, hoping she would change her mind and stop me. But she didn't. She didn't even look me in the eye when I was leaving the house, let alone speak to me. I had nowhere else to go, not even to Miss Henderson's house because her husband still lived with her. She had made a promise to me that she would get a divorce from him once she sorted the matters about her grandfather's will, which stated that she would get the properties if she had stayed married to Mr. Henderson 7 years after his death, and it had only been 5 years. When I told her about my mother finding out about us as a result and me getting kicked out, she asked me to manage for a few days until she figured some things out. The first night, I spent sleeping on my house's porch, and around 3 a.m., I even saw Mom peeking, but she never asked me to come back in. The next day, my little brother came and told me that Mom wants me to go sleep somewhere else. So I roamed around the next day with hopes in my heart that either my mom or Miss Henderson would call me, but none of them did. I understood Mom was punishing me, but why was she ignoring me? She was the one who manipulated me into sleeping with her the first time, and that was not it. She was the one who persisted that we keep doing this, and that was the reason I fell for her. I had already spent 2 days sleeping on the street, but I was not going to sleep another day like that. So I decided to go to her house and confront her. When my affair with her wasn't discovered by my mom, I used to sneak into her house through the back door. So I thought of doing the same thing and went to use the back of her house. That's when I witnessed something really disturbing. She was kissing Jackson. He was a friend of Harry, her son, and mine. The three of us used to have sleepovers before my affair started, but now I know that it was not just me she was sleeping with. As I was thinking that while watching them, she pulled out a knife and stabbed him. I was dumbfounded and horrified as I stood there frozen. I always knew she was a violent person, but I never knew she could go to the extent to hurt someone. As she was stabbing him, I heard her saying with the calmest expression on her face, "Only if you could have kept your mouth shut." I kept hiding there beside the window as I saw her dragging the body around and taking it somewhere else. I figured she was about to come to her backyard to bury the body, so I sneakily moved to the other side of her house from where I could see what she was doing. I was surprised her just leaving the body outside, going back in, and that was when I noticed her wearing rubber gloves. All at the same time, it hit me. She had planned it all along, and whatever plan she had made for me and Jackson must have ruined it. I knew she lacked empathy and was manipulative and aggressive, but this was beyond my imagination. She was a real sociopath. I couldn't just leave my friend's body like that, so I called 911 and went to check on him. Just when I thought he was dead, I felt his distinct faint breathing. Police had already told me that they would be here in 10 minutes, but I was just not strong enough to handle this on my own, so I called Mom. After the third ring, she picked up. "Mom," I started crying after saying that, and she got worried. I told her about Jackson, and she immediately drove over to where I was. But before she could reach, Miss Henderson saw me and came outside. "Oh my God, Xavier, what happened? Is this Jackson? Who did this to him?" As she was asking me all of these questions with absolutely no remorse on her face, I felt disgusted by her. "Don't worry, Miss Henderson, he was alive. He'll tell us himself about what happened once he wakes up," I said with tears dripping down my eyes. That was when my mom's car reached and she rushed to us. "Get away from here!" She pushed her and squatted down to check his pulse. "He's alive, but not for long. We have to hurry and take him to the ER," she said. By the way, did I mention earlier that my mom was a doctor? I followed her advice and helped her carry him to the car. That was also when the police van showed up. As we put Jackson in the car to drive him to the hospital while one of the officers accompanied us, Miss Henderson was getting arrested. She looked at me with disbelief. Guess she couldn't believe her crime was witnessed by someone, let alone her teenage lover. But I didn't care to spare her another look. As we drove to the hospital, I kept thinking that my mom was right all along. She had been manipulating and using me all this time for her selfish gains. And I was just too stupid to notice that. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. I was in 9th grade when I first found the Zultar Speaks in an arcade. I went with my friend Chad. It was a classic animatronic fortune-telling machine. There were fortune-telling cookies that I knew about, but I had never seen something like this in my life. Even though I knew it was fake and there wasn't such a thing as predicting someone's future, I still inserted the coin in the slot. The guy inside the machine moved his hand over the crystal ball in front of him, and a robotic voice said, "Hear your future from Zultar. It looks like today would be your lucky day, for I see you finding something you long for." A ticket was printed out telling the fortune that I would find something, while the guy inside the machine said something along the lines of, "Come again if you want to know your future." I put the ticket in my back pocket, laughing about these things being fake, and went back to playing other games in the arcade. After about an hour or two of playing, I went back home with Chad, who lived just across the street from me. The very same evening, when I was watching a cartoon with my little sister Mia in the living room, Father surprises us with his sudden return from the business trip he had gone to, and originally should be arriving 3 days later. With the happiness from this, Mom made a special dinner for all of us, which was amazing since she usually made us eat healthy things such as green vegetables for our meals. I was the kind of kid who was picky to a fault and always made all kinds of faces during meals. But that dinner I ate gladly without causing a commotion for the first time since there was nothing green about this food. Son, I had brought something for you." As I was leaving my room for dinner, Father called me. My eyes opened widely in exhalation when I saw the box he was holding. He had brought me that Minecraft game I was asking for months. I rushed to take it while saying thank you, along with giving him a cheery hug. "Didn't you say we were short on money this month? We could have bought it some other time," I heard Mom saying to Father, as she took off his coat and hung it inside the wardrobe. The salesman's pitch was too good. I couldn't refuse it. Besides, I finally got my bonus this morning. I heard his voice walking out of the room. I still had the ticket in my back pocket from Zultar, so I took it out and looked at it. Then I looked back to the box I was holding. It couldn't be. Did my fortune just come true? I thought in my mind. The next day, I asked Chad to come to the same arcade with me. When the two of us reached there, I went to the spot where I saw the machine last time. But it was strange. The machine wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was some other game placed. I went to one of the employees and asked where they put it, and what they said was even weirder. "What are you talking about, kid? We never had Zultar in our arcade." I looked at Chad, who looked confused as to what was happening. When I asked him if he saw that machine the last time we came here together, he denied it, saying that he was playing games the whole time and didn't pay much attention to what I was doing. I went back home afterward, confused and a bit terrified, thinking what I met with could be a ghost machine. But that's not how the story ends. About 10 years later, I was at Chad's birthday party, which he had arranged as a costume one. Yes, the two of us remained friends even after all those years. He was wearing a pirate costume while I was in Zack Foster's costume. It's one of the anime characters, and those who have seen it probably would recognize him immediately. Anyway, so as we were talking about something, I noticed a man in Zultar's costume. He approached and introduced himself as the character, and didn't give us his real name. Thinking of him as one of the guests, we talked to him for a few minutes and moved on to greet others. But a few minutes later, he came back and asked to do a tarot card reading. Since I did not want to appear impolite, I let him do whatever he wanted. He gave us a creepy smile, which felt unnatural for some reason, and then started with the character's famous line before saying something weird. "This party is going to come to an end soon, and you would end up covered in something red." I won't deny that the way he said that felt harrowing, but I still laughed thinking he was just acting the part he was dressed as. But his expression changed at my response, and whispered something into my ear before walking away, which left me petrified. We all went toward the bar to enjoy a few drinks, but I don't know why I continued feeling uneasy and disturbed. I scanned the room to see if the man was still there, and his absence only made me more frantic. It is fun for you people, isn't it? My attention was drawn to the drunk woman whose eyes appeared to be red and swollen, probably from crying, as she sat on the chair next to mine. Huh? I looked around to see if she was talking to someone else, as her eyes was stuck on the filled glass in front of her. It isn't. Don't worry. I'll make fun for everyone. She turned her head toward me and said while looking straight into my confused eyes. I was still trying to make sense of her words, but then she pulled out a gun and blew her brains out. The sudden burst of blood splattered all over my face and clothes, making me unable to move from the state of panic I was stuck in from that. A great deal of terror washed all over my face, and I started screaming, which only got faint from mingling with others. My feelings got disoriented. I started shaking like a leaf, along with tears falling from my eyes. Police were called immediately. A few of them started taking care of the scene, and 2 of them proceeded with questioning the remaining guests, but looking at how I was having a panic attack, they said they'd question me when I felt better, and moved on to questioning the others. Chad took me to a bathroom and helped me wash the blood off my face. As he was doing that, I could tell his face turning pale from thinking something. He then looked at me and said, "I understand the part of the party ending early looking at his possible involvement in this, but how did that Zultar man know you were going to get covered in blood?" His words blanched my already terrified face. "How did you like the Minecraft game, son?" His whispering words started ringing in my ears as I stood there frozen, covered in the woman's blood, while Chad tried to wash it off.
I had a stalker in secondary school. Well, not quite the follow you everywhere and make a shrine out of your hair kind of stalker, but enough to make me feel afraid for my safety on an almost daily basis. It made for a fairly terrifying 2 years before my mom got married and we moved to the complete other side of London. He was this huge rugby player, very handsome and extremely popular, so of course there were absolutely no social repercussions for him, and people basically refused to believe that he'd pay any attention to me at all, let alone anything remotely abusive. When he started obsessing over me, most everyone brushed it off or made excuses for him, but it quickly became an absolute nightmare. He was always making comments towards me, pinching or pulling my hair when no one else was looking. It was creepy because he obviously didn't want anyone to really know what he was doing. He knew it was disturbed, and he knew it would make him look bad if it all came to light. Sometimes he'd say things like, "I can smell you. You're about to be on your period." Or, "Nice and clean." Always in the creepiest, perviest way imaginable, as if it couldn't get more obvious that he was enjoying it. One of the scariest moments I can recall is when I was scanning the vending machine one morning before class trying to figure out what to have for breakfast. He came up behind me, placed his hands on my waist, pushed me right up against the machine and said very clearly in my ear, "One day, I'm gonna kidnap you, take you to the forest, tie you up, and screw you until you want it." That was 3 weeks before our move date, and the only thing that stopped me from going to the head teacher was the fact that it wouldn't be long until I never had to deal with this guy ever again. But I now know that that was the complete wrong approach. Even if you manage to escape someone like that, they just pick a new victim, and another, and another. They only stop victimizing women when they're actually confronted by authority figures, and even then they might be psycho enough to just carry on. So please, if anything like this happens to you, report it to the relevant authorities. Even school staff take stuff like that really seriously and won't hesitate to get the police involved if they think that's the right course of action. You might be able to describe 17-year-old David Faraday as the all-American boy. David was clean-cut, a good student, and a member of the Boy Scouts of America. He was also apparently something of a moral arbiter, having once confronted a marijuana dealer outside of his high school when the man had apparently been attempting to peddle the drug to members of the student body. After threatening to inform the police, the dealer was said to never have hung around the high school again. And although by today's standards we might consider this to be so-called snitch behavior, David was clearly simply trying to protect his fellow students from something he was concerned would affect their academic performance. He was a good person, with a good heart, and almost all of what he did came from a place of love. But like many boys his age, David found himself increasingly interested in the opposite gender, and there was one particular young lady that caught his attention over all others. Betty Lou Jensen was 16, a year younger than David, but she was incredibly popular, and her reputation as a charming, well-mannered young lady preceded her. She was also a very talented artist who took a great deal of interest in all things creative. It was at a local youth function that David got the chance to talk to Betty Lou, and his affection for her seemed to be entirely reciprocated. Betty Lou shared a great deal with him and even invited him to visit her after school so that he could walk her home. After a few weeks of wholesome teenage dating, something of a relationship began to blossom between the two bright-eyed young people. But all was not entirely well, as there was another boy who had his eye on Betty Lou, one who was not about to let David have her all to himself. He squared up to David when the young man was waiting outside of Betty Lou's high school, and although the confrontation didn't become physical, some pretty harsh insults were exchanged, and David was warned to stay away from his new girlfriend. Other boys might have been deterred by such a display of possessiveness and aggression, but not David. He was determined to secure his place as the only boy in Betty Lou's life, and so one afternoon on their way home from school, David asked Betty if she'd like to go on a date with him, their first date, and to his absolute elation, Betty Lou said yes. David racked his brain for a solid first date idea, and given that it was late December, decided that a great way to capture that festive romantic spirit would be to take Betty Lou to a local Christmas event. And being the gentleman that he was, he made a promise to her parents to have her back home by 11 p.m. at the very latest. Rumor has it that David and Betty were planning on attending the Christmas-themed party with a few other local high school students, but perhaps this was simply a cover to reassure the young girl's parents, because what we know for certain is that they ended up driving over to Lake Herman Road in David's Rambler station wagon, parking it up in quite a well-known spot that was known to many as Lover's Lane. The whole appeal of the spot near Lake Herman is that it was quiet and unfrequented by members of the public, hence why young couples might use it to gain some privacy for certain unsavory activities. But it wasn't just infatuated lovebirds who noted the location's seclusion, because someone else wished to take advantage of the isolation for something that was considerably more malicious. At some point during their stay up on Lover's Lane, David and Betty Lou noticed another car pull into the spot, one that parked up alongside them before turning its lights off. At first, David and Betty were worried it was the cops, come to arrest them for committing lewd acts in public. But as they peered through the darkness to study the vehicle next to them, it became increasingly obvious that it was not in fact the police. All the young couple could do was watch, growing increasingly scared as the shadowy silhouette in the front seat stayed statue still, staring at them through the passenger's window. Betty Lou told David she was spooked and asked him to see if he could get the person to leave. But unlike previous encounters where David's bravery had shone through when confronted with a source of maliciousness, he too was far too frightened to do anything. But as he prepared to start up the Rambler's engine so he could drive Betty Lou out of there, the driver of the other vehicle got out and approached David's side of the Rambler. David was transfixed, frozen in fear like a deer in a car's headlights, but when he saw the mysterious stranger pull out a pistol and aim it at his window, his flight response kicked into gear. Betty threw open the passenger side door, throwing herself from the Rambler before David followed suit, but neither kid was fast enough to outrun a bullet. The stranger fired once through the roof of the Rambler, then sprinted around the back to fire another shot at David through the vehicle's rear window. Both shots hit the young man, and he crawled along the ground near the station wagon's back wheel on the passenger side, trying and failing to escape. Betty Lou, however, began to sprint away through the darkness as the first shots were fired, but the stranger was fast. He took aim and fired 5 shots at the right side of her back, each bullet striking her torso before she fell. As she lay dying in the darkness, the killer turned his attentions back to David, pointing the pistol towards his head and pulling the trigger one last time, sending a bullet crashing into his skull just behind his left ear. Apparently, the killer then simply got back into his car and drove away into the night. Sometime later, someone who drove past the spot on Lover's Lane must have seen the bodies lying in the dirt and then rushed to call the police. David was still breathing when they arrived on the scene, but was completely unresponsive and was dead on arrival when he was finally taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. The double homicide stunned and horrified the local community, and rumors abounded that there was a crazed firearm-wielding madman on the loose, with it only being a matter of time before they struck again. One of the first people contacted by the police as a potential suspect in the murders was the young man who had confronted David as a result of his own jealousies over his and Betty Lou's blossoming relationship. But it was discovered that this young man had a strong alibi for his whereabouts, meaning there was no way he could have been the mysterious bloodthirsty stranger who pulled into Lover's Lane that night. As the summer of 1969 drew to a close, journalists and law enforcement alike wondered if the teenage lover's killer would ever be found, but little did they know that the nightmare had just began, and what would follow would continue to baffle all those involved for decades to come. Because the man who took David and Betty Lou's lives that evening, the man who relentlessly fired bullet after bullet into the Rambler station wagon, would come to be known by a name that would echo through the annals of true crime all over the world: the Zodiac. Zodiac's identity remains a complete mystery even to this day. The killer's nickname originated from a series of taunting letters and cards sent to the San Francisco Bay Area press. These letters included 4 cryptograms based around a number of ciphers, one of which was recently solved by the FBI after over 50 years of research and study. We know for certain that the Zodiac murdered 5 people in Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, and San Francisco in the 11 months spanning December of 1968 and October of 1969. It seems he preferred to target young couples, which is how he seemed to have come across David and Betty Lou while the pair were on their first date. Yet despite only 5 confirmed victims being attributed to the Zodiac, he once claimed to have murdered 32 other people, bringing his total body count to 37 victims. A killing spree that started with 2 young lovers, so excited to finally have some time alone together on their first date, never being able to imagine that it would end in such a brutal moment of painful finality. So the next time you're on a first date, don't be so quick to go somewhere secluded, as you never know who might be watching or following, just ready to turn a perfect romantic moment into a living nightmare.